I'm going to talk about vertex painting and how vertex painting can be a great tool when you're trying to make worlds look as random and as realistic as possible. But you're dealing with a lot of small elements, and you're dealing with the same textures on all of them. And you know, the rule of thumb that we always have is you want the least number of assets, and you want the least number of textures possible when you're building an environment. Because the more you have, obviously, the more complicated it is, the harder it is to light, the harder it is to keep your frame rate up when you're playing it. It's a very complicated issue. So what we try to do as designers is I want to always make sure that I'm building with the smallest possible piece with the simplest possible texture. So what I have here on my screen is I have two examples of a very simple wall. All right. So I've got these two pieces of wall are it's just a little thing that I built in a 3D program. It's minimal polygons. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, underneath 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe 12 sides on this thing. Okay, probably didn't count that really well, but 12 sides. And let's say I'm trying to build an environment that I'd like to have like a big playground is completely ringed, or an area that's completely ringed by these walls. So I've got a simplistic wall, and I have a texture that represents the bricks. That's the bricks that I want to have on that particular wall. Now the problem that I have, if you haven't already seen it, is, let me click on something else so those lines go away. I have a real problem dealing with repeating textures. So look at the seam that runs right down the middle of that wall. Okay. First thing you're going to notice is one texture comes to an end and another one begins. So bricks just seem to randomly stop. All right. And if you come up here to the top, up there, you'll see, you really get to see hard lines of where that happened. The other problem that you're going to have is the longer this wall gets, the more noticeable things are going to become. For example, look at this little dark spot right here. There's a little dark spot on the brick. Now there's a little dark spot over here. And the two of them together maybe don't look that bad. Of course, once somebody points them out to you, that's all they see. That's all you can see. But if I grab both of these and I pull them down and create two more bricks, two more brick patterns going on there. We'll butt those up against one another so I don't end up with any overlap. Okay. Now what happens is you really start to see repetitious patterns. So I can see dot, 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 dot. I can see this group over here. This part of the pattern that you see here is repeated there. And if I come down over here, it's repeated there, and then it's repeated down here again. Okay. So this pattern keeps repeating itself over and over and over again. So there must be something that I can do to seal it up, because that's my brick texture and that's my model. But if I'm going to create an entire environment with these things, it'd be really nice if I had some sort of a way of obscuring parts of that wall so you didn't really see that. So here's what we do. We create something called a vertex material that we can use to paint on an object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a single material that's made up of two different textures. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the paint tool, which is up over here in my mode pattern. I'm going to use the paint tool to change the texture that you see on the surface of the model. And I'm going to be using plaster, and I'm going to be using brick. Now I've got both of those made here already. I've got plaster. That's what the plaster looks like. It's just a nice painted plaster thing. So it's a nice clean wall. Okay. And then I've got my brick pattern, and that's not going to work either. Neither one of those two things are going to work. Number one, pattern. I want the wall to look like it's half brick and half plaster. So I need to have a material that will do that. I'm going to use the tools in here to fix that. And here's another reason why we do this. Because I need to create an entire environment out of that one wall section, Unreal treats instances of assets without loading up their memory. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is if I place an instance of this brick wall in my scene, let's just say for a random amount that it takes 35K of memory to remember that wall and its texture there in my scene. If I go and create another asset and bring another asset in and drop it into my scene, let's say the next one is 50K. So now I've got a 35K model and a 50K model. And let's say I bring in 100 different models and they're all at 100K a piece. Now I've got 10,000K or 10 megs plus the original 35 and then the original 50. So the more assets I bring in, the more that memory adds up. So what Unreal does is if you bring in a single asset, in this case that particular wall piece that's maybe 35K worth of memory, I can clone that instance of that same asset 10 million times in my scene if I so choose, and it only counts the original 35K of memory. So think of it this way: you bring in one asset, one asset's going to take up resources, but you're free to make as many copies of that resource as you want, and it doesn't take up any more memory. Once Unreal loads the asset and the texture in its own memory, it can repeat it 10 million times if it has to, and it doesn't require any more computing power. So that's the reason why whenever I'm building a large environment, I try to build the least possible complicated shape, knowing that I can recreate it as many times in the world as possible. And using Vertex Painting, I can go in and say, look, that's a repetitious brick pattern, but watch what I can do. I can actually make those two pieces look like they are one big piece of continuous wall. All right, and I can also do that. Even though I make changes to them, they're still only counted as one asset of 35K, which is really kind of cool. So that's kind of what I'm going to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to create a new material. All right, and I'm going to call that M_Vertex. I'm going to call it 2 because I've already got one in here. M_Vertex 2. Whoops, that's not the one I want. This is the one I want. All right. Now, this is going to require 2 separate sets of textures, and it's going to require 2 separate sets of normal maps, because I've got normal maps for each of them. So the first one I'm going to deal with is going to be my plaster. So I'm going to bring the plaster, the 2 images in, and I'm going to drop them. And I've also got the 2 images for my brick and my brick normal. I'm going to bring those both in, and I'm going to drop them. Let's make that bigger. Let's pull this thing kind of off to the side over here. I didn't mention it before, but this window is as big as you need it to be. So it's like there is no, it's like if I wanted to, I could grab that thing and pull it clear over here and build this entire chain out here to the left, or I can keep them down here really close. It doesn't really matter, just so they can be wired together and you've got room to do everything that you need to do. I'm also going to show you how to do comments in here. So if somebody's trying to read what you're trying to do, it makes a little bit more sense. All right, so I've got plaster, and I got a, whoops, go away. And I got a plaster normal here. All right, I've also got brick, and I got a brick normal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep these elements here, and I'm going to separate them, keep them together, and I'm going to pull them down because I'm going to put something between them. But this is I need to keep these all together, because I need to keep in mind the fact that I'm going to be having material number 1 and I'm going to be having material number 2. So I need to make sure that I've got this thing visually set up, that I know my plaster is first, my brick is second, my plaster normal is first, and my plaster normal is second. Okay, now remember, I can only wire one of these things in it, like it's either plaster there or it's brick. It can't be both of them, so I'm going to have to do something different here in just a second. All right, but I need to add a couple of other elements in here first. All right, the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be painting what's called to a vertex. That's why it's called vertex painting. What is a vertex? Well, I've talked a little bit about vertices. Vertex is singular, vertices is plural. All right. Let's open up that model of that wall, which is down here. There's the wall. Okay. And let's look at this thing. Actually, I'm looking at the back side. We'll adjust the lighting so we're looking at it from this side. There we go. Right. So there's my wall. Okay. If I looked at this thing in wireframe, what I would see is it's made up of hundreds of polygons, which have been converted to hundreds of triangles. Right? So this thing has all of these polygons and all of these vertices on this model. So while it looks like a simple model, it's actually made up of a lot more polygons than it would first glance look like it does. All right. Now, if I tried to do this vertex painting and I literally had a simplified box that had one large polygon cut into two triangles that represented the front, one large that was cut into two triangles that represented the back. It's kind of like when you're trying to use displacement on something, or you can't really displace that because displacement occurs when a vertex is either moved out or moved in, or moved left or moved right, or moved up or moved down. When you take an individual vertex, which is where all those lines are crossing, so that vertex right there either goes out, in, up or down, left or right. That's how I would affect the shape of this model. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be painting texture, and the painting is going to be encoded into each individual vertex. So basically what I'm going to say is the entire model has the brick texture on it, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to paint the plaster texture onto this vertex, and then onto that vertex, and onto this vertex, and onto that vertex. And then what it'll do is I'll have an area of plaster surrounded by an area of brick, because the plaster information is stored on each individual vertex. The more of those vertices that I have on a model, the finer the painting I can do when I get ready to go in and do the texture painting, which is what we're going to do. Okay, so the less I have, the harder it is to do, because it's going to put in a large, it's going to say, oh, look, you want this whole thing over here brick. No, I really want brick in just a few places and plaster in a lot of places. The more vertices that I have, the more edges, the more polygons, the more room I have to go in and paint the things that I need to do. All right, so let's go back to that material. Vertex 2. There we go. All right, so what I need to add into here is I'm going to be painting either with this one or this one, or and each of those is going to have its own normal map associated with it. So I need something in here called a vertex color. It's the first thing that comes up. And I just right click, and the little window that comes up in the top, I type in vertex. It gives me every time vertex appears. Don't worry about memorizing these things right off the bat. Almost everything I do, you can either see it or it's told to you exactly what it's called in a handout. So it's going to take you most of the semester to learn what all of these things are, how they all work, and how you call them all up. But you're going to see we pretty much use the same things over and over and over and over again. If you're dealing with vertex painting, you're going to be dealing with a vertex color node. Okay, I'm going to pop that right there in the middle there. Now, what this vertex node contains is it contains the same type of input data here, or output data that these have. This has got a composite image, it has the red image, it has the green, the blue, and then the opacity. This one has exactly the same thing, but this is dealing with what we're going to be painting for vertices. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be assigning one of these textures here, either the plaster or the brick, is going to be assigned to a channel of my vertex color. And we're going to get it all set up that way. Okay. Now, something else we need to talk about here. This is sort of these are the 5 main components I'm going to have. One of the things that you might find that you need to do, for example, I'm going to pull the brick over here, and I'm going to put the brick on that thing. And I'm going to click Save. And I'm going to close this down. Pull it off to the side here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that vertex, I'm going to apply it to that object right there. Okay. And then I'll apply it, I'll just leave that one applied to that one. All right. Now, you notice how that image is basically the same size as that texture. All right. What if I wanted that texture to be smaller? What if I said, you know, I found this nice brick texture, but the bricks are way too big. I wish I had something smaller. I wish I had more bricks and that they were a little bit smaller. You have the ability to do that. Okay. We have something in here called a texture coordinate. Now I'm going to type in COORD, and the one I'm looking for is a texture coordinate right down here. And let's look at this little window right here. All right. It's red. That has a certain function. Vertex color is red also. The colors are based upon what they do. They're in different classes or different families, and certain colors can't be wired to others. But a texture coordinate is meant to work with the texture samples. And what it allows you to do is, if you look over here on the details panel, you're going to see I have something called U tiling and V tiling. Now, if you take a 3D class from me and you learn how to create textures to go on top of things, you're going to learn about something called UVW maps. U, V, and W. W, we cannot find any example anywhere in the 3D program of what W stands for or what it means, but it's in there and it's referred to as UVW. But for our purposes, U and V have to do with horizontal and vertical. U is horizontal, V is vertical. Why it's not H tiling, I don't know, but it's U for horizontal and V for vertical. And the way that this would work, let's put this on that plane there so you can see it. If I change my U tiling to, say, 2, it stretches everything out to be twice the size. It just made everything twice as wide. If I go in and say make it 0.5, then it takes everything down to be smaller. Let's go back to this one. Oh, you know why? It's because I don't have it hooked up. Let's hook that up. All right, there we go. Okay, I just failed editing 101. 1, 1. All right. So there we go. That's now set to 1 and 1. There's a little triangle here. You can open this up, and it gives you this little chart, which I've never been able to figure out, exactly what that is. Usually I have to match the numbers, not the shape of that thing or the color scheme that you see there. But let's look at this one. If I go in here to U tiling and set that to 2, all right, things are half the width. I'm getting 2 sets of textures horizontally. So it's running now twice, and you can see there's a seam running right down the middle. Okay. If I go down to this one and I say 0.5, what it's going to do is it's going to turn these things into little squares. All right. So this U and V tiling allows me to go in and change the way a particular material works. Now, by default, you don't need one of those. Okay. But let's say, you looked at that and you said, well, those bricks are they seem a little bit big for me. Maybe I'd like to see those maybe a little bit more like this, or maybe I'd like to see them a little bit more like that. Maybe that's a little bit more brick sized, or maybe even 1.5. All right, I want the bricks to look a little bit more like that. Well, what I can do is if I plug that into this one, that's now changing the UV tiling. All of the other ones, however, are going to remain the way they are. Now, the problem that I have is I've also got down here, I have a normal map. And the normal map is set to what it was originally. Now, you can see what's happening here is I actually have the normals from the original bricks laying over the material that is now twice as many bricks, or 1.5 times the bricks. So what I can do is I can take this and I can wire it down to that one as well, and it changes now the normals to match the texture. whereas the plaster would remain the same. This would still be 1:1, that is still 1:1, but this one is 1.5:1, this one is 1.5:1 as well. So what I can do is I can go in and I can create different looks to things. Go back to 1.25, I think that looks a little better. I can create a different proportion of one material to the other, right? And I'm going to do that. If I go back and look at this thing, let me save that up. And you can see the difference between the brick on the left and the brick on the right. Okay, they're smaller, and they have a little bit better. I think they look a little bit better in terms of their normal mapping on there. That works just a little bit better than that. So I think that that's actually probably more like I want to take those things. So I'm going to go ahead here and make sure that this block wall also has the same material. Okay. Now, by no means are we done, because I haven't done anything for this thing yet. So let me break that. Right click and select break. I'm going to break that link, and I'm going to leave that texture coordinate here. If you want to, sometimes you'll see this. People will go in and, well, I'm going to right click and type in chord again, and we'll go down here and we'll get a texture coordinate. And I'm going to go ahead and plug that into this one and plug that into this one, because I'm going to leave those both at 1. I might want to change those later on. I'm just sort of making this so it's adaptable for me to do some things later on. Another thing that they do here in Unreal, which makes it easy for us to set up the kind of the way things work, is you can go in and at a glance you can add in information. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say that this one is 1.25 and then 1.25. Okay, this one up here is 1:1. So what I can tell at a glance here is the texture coordinates are set differently, and I can see them at a glance. I don't have to go hunting for them over here. I don't have to actually click on that before I can see it's 1.25, and actually it's 1.25 and 1. All right, and this one up here is 1:1. And so I can keep those things here, so now I know for sure that that's kind of what's going on. All right, now, what we have to do is I have to find a way to apply these two materials at once. I talked about I can only put one in there. If I put one in and then I try to put the other one in, it just wipes it out. All right, I need something a little bit different in here. Break that. So what I need to do is, and actually I've got 3 things that I need to combine, because I have this texture and I have that texture and I've got my vertex color here. My vertex color is how I'm going to mix them together. And I've got the same thing true down below. I've got the normal for the plaster and the normal for the brick. I need to mix them together because I can only put one or the other of those will go into the normal map. I can't take that one and then put this one in too. I can only put one or the other in there. So I'm going to have to do something different. And the element that we use to do that is called a lerp. Now, lerp, hold down the L and click. Lerp stands for linear interpolate. And if you look on the left-hand side of the screen over here, it has the name of it, a material expression, linear interpolate, or LERP for short. And what this linear interpolate will do is it is designed to say, look, you have a component A and you have a component B, and then you're going to put them together using a third component, C. And they call that alpha, for lack of anything different. It's just, it can be, think of it as A, B, and C. But it's, I have material A, and I have material B, all right? And the way I want to paint those things together is going to be using my opacity channel here of my vertex color. Now I can wire this into that. Now you notice it shows me the brick. Why does it show me the brick if plaster is in the A slot? All right? It doesn't really matter. The first material that you have is the one that you're going to paint. The first one, or the second material, is the base material. Think of them as in order from the bottom up. There's my base material. I am going to be painting on top of my base material plaster. So that's why brick shows up. I have it in here second. All right. Now I've got this lerp up here on that. I also need a lerp down below because I've got to do the exact same thing with our normal maps. I'm going to have slot A, and you need to make sure that that's why I have these lined up. Plaster up here is A, plaster normal is A. Brick normal is B, just like brick normal is B up here. And then the alpha channel, which is the C, how I'm going to mix them together, is going to be done using my vertex color. So I'm going to click on that and put it in. And then I wire this directly into normal. All right. And again, you're seeing the brick. All right. Now, it looks like we're almost done, except there's actually one more element that's got to go into here. All right, and that is I'm going to be multiplying either one of these textures by my vertex color. This is the channel with which I'm going to be painting. I have the composite, I've got the red, green, blue, and the opacity channel to deal with. In this particular case, these could be plugged into any channel. It's not really important. The importance on this one is that I've got these things are plugged into a channel that's not being used for anything else. All right. But for me to take and be able to paint between one and the other, this is where the composite vertex is going to come into play. This little node right here is going to be what I have to wire into something, and I can't wire it into that because if I do, it knocks this one out. And you can see what happens. All I have over here are the normal maps. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to take this and I'm going to have to basically combine it with this over here. Now, when you think about the words that we use, normally we say things like, I need to add one element in with another. So since we're dealing with nodes that are named after mathematical equations, the assumption might be, well, if I'm going to take this and I'm going to add it to that, maybe I need to add those two together using an add command, which would be A. And I could say, well, why don't we take this and why don't we add that together, and then that way I can wire those things into my basic. Well, the problem there is, you notice there's nothing going on. What this is doing is this is literally adding the materials all together. That's what adding is doing in here. It's adding the plaster and adding the brick and adding this invisible vertex color thing, and I end up with this. It's not brick and it's not plaster and it's not anything else. So add is not going to work. In reality, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply. We're going to take those materials and we're going to use this to paint with one of the two materials like that, and I should be back to my brick material now. Okay, if I put add in there, it doesn't work. If I use multiply, by multiplying these two textures by my painting capabilities, I'm going to end up with a material that I can paint. Now, I can leave this up here for a moment so you can see it. I'll zoom in and take a look at it. I'm also going to show you really quickly, you can add comments to things. And the way that you can add a comment to something is if you select two nodes, just click and drag like that, and hit C on your keyboard, what you'll get is you'll get a little comment window. Now, what's cool about the comment window is you can actually use it to pick it up and pull those things away. All right, and in my comment window up here, what I can type in, I can type UV tiling, and now I know that that's what those particular things are doing. Or I can select these, and I can type in C, and I can click on that, and I can type in original texture. And I can pull them away. And I can select these two down here and type in C, and then I can pull that thing down, and I can type in. Now these are obvious what those things are, but you never know. All right, and then I can select that, I can type in C, and type in Vertex node painting. I'll just type in Vertex Paint. And you can see I can either still move an individual item like this. I can resize that box. I can also just, whoops. Let's see if I can get this to go there. And then grab it and bring it down here. I can pick that whole thing up and just slide the whole thing out over here and do that. And then I can go in and identify these as what they're doing. This is combining my textures. This is combining my normals. This is multiplying times the vertex color. So I can go in and be as specific as I want in these things. You can put as many of those things in there. You can also go in and you can colorize them. You can change the color of them to go in and do different things. So there's a lot of different things that we can do on that. You can see the comment color over here. Maybe you want all your comments to be in a yellow box. Or maybe you want certain comments to be in a yellow box and you want others to be in blue, and you can kind of color coordinate. Remember, you got to kind of assume that people are going to be looking at your stuff later on, and it's helpful if they can actually look at it and see what it is that you were doing. All right, let's move on here. I'm going to save that up now. Close that down. All right, and again, that material is already applied to there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you how to paint. So let's click on this one over here first, and let's look and see what painting does. So that vertex material contains all of the information necessary for this next part of the program to do its job. So I'm going to select the paint tool up over here, and we're going to look, and we got a couple of things going on. Number one, we have the ability to paint with colors or with blend weights. I'm going to choose blend weight. All right, because of the way I have that material set up, you're going to go in and you're going to choose blend weight. Now, down below that, immediately underneath it, you're going to see texture count. There are two. There are two textures, and they're being controlled by alpha lerps. And we know that because I put two lerps out next to my materials, one for the textures, one for the normals. So I've got two alpha lerps controlling my textures. Basically, I've got two sets of textures going on. Okay. My paint texture number one is what I'm going to be painting on here. That's going to give me a look. Now, paint number one is the base. So if I'm painting, I want to be painting with texture number two. Okay. Now, so I'm painting with number two, erasing the texture. Erasing is not really erasing. Erasing is painting back to the original color. That's done by using your shift key and doing that. Now you'll notice that little circle that's appearing on my wall right there. It's my paintbrush. All right, that's controlled by the information down below. So I think when you first do it, it's 256, or maybe I guess it's 128. When you first make something, it's going to be 128. So you're going to see that big diameter. That big circle shows you how big your brush is. Every one of those little dots you see appearing on that model, those are the vertices I'm going to be painting information to. So I'm going to be painting the information about the stucco onto each of those little dots. And you'll see there are enough dots on that thing. I can take that brush, and I can take that brush down to maybe about the size of 10. Okay. And you can see that that's still going to cover like 9 of those dots. So I'm going to be able to paint really, really finely here. If I can go down to 2, paint really finely, and I'm still going to be able to pick up a couple of those things. So I'm going to be able to control and do some really nice fine painting on this thing of textures. Maybe I'll leave that at 4 right there. I've also got a strength texture. Strength is just how quickly it goes down. It kind of goes down, and you kind of have to work an area. It's like you're just kind of scrubbing it to put that thing down. If I go and I up that pressure in here, then it's going to put down that stucco just a little bit faster. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll set that to 0.8. And then fall off. Fall off is the softness of that brush. So if I go in and start doing something, I get a real soft effect going on that thing. I get these little fuzzy edges. And you can see the little fuzzy edges going on that thing. Okay, let me go in here and I need to erase some of those extra things that I did. All right, you can see that kind of the soft fuzzy edge going around that thing. Okay, if I go in and I set that fall off to 0, then what I have is I have a hard edge, and it goes down and does it a little bit more angular. If you remember, if you look when we looked at the original model in here, and I looked at it in wireframe, you'll notice that it's all made up of triangles. So you can really see those triangles well. And so when I'm painting, it tends to paint along or up that diagonal. So if I were to start painting here, it kind of goes this way, and it goes right up that diagonal angle right there. So if I come back down here and I go, let's click and paint, it kind of, you can see it kind of goes up a diagonal, and I can come back and I can fill it in. So you're limited a little bit to the shape of those things, and maybe it's best that it was cut up into more triangles so I can get a little bit better on that, but I think it works pretty good. All right. So then what I can do is, and this is the beauty of it, let's go back and I'll take that up a little bit more. And I'm going to keep that a little soft around the edge. What I can do is, where I've got this weird overlap here, I can say, look, let's go back in and kind of put some, I want it to look like maybe the plaster is breaking off in certain places, but maybe right along that edge right there, I really want these two things to butt up against one another. Okay, and I can then click on this one, get the same paintbrush, and do the same thing. Now this is here until I redo my lighting. Okay, and I can come over here and I can do what I want to on this one and make it look like, you know, there's certain aspects of it, you know, are leaking through like that. Okay, that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up and I'm going to rebuild my lighting. Hopefully that seam goes away between those two. And it does. So what I end up with is something that looks like it's a solid single piece of wall, but it's actually two pieces of wall, and you don't see the repetition of the brick. Now I can do this with as many colors as I want, so, or with many textures. Let's say now what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back and I'd like to add maybe some ivy growing up here. What I could do is I could go back into my texture, which is Vertex 2. I can come back into my texture, and I've just got two materials here. What I can do is I can say, let's pull this up, and let's add a third texture into this thing. Now, when you do a third texture, because I've only got A and B and alpha, what I would have to do is with the third texture, I would have to add another lerp out over here. These two would get added into one and go to A. The third one would go into B, and then that would come out of both of those. So I can do that and put as many of those things in there. And then once I've got a third channel, then I can just go back over there and paint with my third channel and add even more stuff on here. And again, the beauty of this is, I don't want to say that. The beauty of this is that those are the same two pieces of wall. That is the exact same texture. The only thing that is loaded into memory is that first piece right here. The second one is completely free. It's not using up any memory at all, yet it looks like a completely different asset with a completely different texture on it. And me going back and modeling 25 of those things to make a big square, or 30 of them to make a big square, and then creating 30 different textures and bringing in 30 models with 30 textures, I would have 30 times the memory tied up in something that's only going to be tied up now with one piece and one texture. So vertex painting is a great way for us to really utilize the tools in here to make things look as varied as possible. Later on this semester, we're going to do some modular work. We're going to create some modular architecture. You're going to be using wooden fences and brick fences and block fences, and you're going to have a chance to go back in and create some really nice materials using vertex painting, so you can always refer back to these things later on. Next up, we're going to show you how to do decals, because there may be a time when I'd like to have maybe a poster projected up on the wall, or maybe I'd like to have a blood splatter on the wall, or maybe I'd like to have something on the ground that looks like a manhole cover. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and do the last element within our materials section, and they are called deferred decals, and we'll talk to you about how those are made and why they're so important to use.